I'm Brian Briscoe, host of the Diary of an Apartment Investor podcast. And this podcast is different than everything else out there. I bring together a new and an experienced investor on each episode, and I let the aspiring investor ask the questions that they need answered. So if you're an aspiring investor yourself, you probably will have the exact same questions. Now, before we get to this episode, make sure you hit the subscribe button below and that little bell to make sure you get notified every time we post a new episode. And now, enjoy the show. Angel, we got Logan on the line. What do you want to ask him?
I want to jump into investing. At the same time, we want to purchase a home, and I don't want to keep putting that off because I'm chasing what I want to do. I really don't know how to get started.
You know, there's some folks in the industry that will tell you never to buy a home. I am not of that strategy. I look at the home as our domestic church, and so it's very different for me. That is an absolute investment in my livelihood, in my business. That's one component of it. The other component is how to get started in investing, right? But what you can do is, and I tell a lot of people this, is, use this as an off season, right? So take an assessment of yourself, a skills assessment. I figured out where my skill set would be the top place to spend my time. And I focus on trying to fill the other pieces with either other people or services or vendors that I could find. And that's how I got kind of started.
All right. This is another episode of the Diary of an Apartment Investor podcast. I'm your host, Brian Briscoe. I'm very excited for today's show. We got two great people on the line with us. We got Logan Freeman and Angel Martinez. And Logan, you're coming in as our super duper experienced investor today. And, super duper, I don't use that word very often. So, it's real. So welcome to the show, Logan.
Man, thank you so much, Brian, for having me. I've been looking forward to this because I love the way that this is set up. I think that it's unique. I think it's exciting and gives the listeners a really good opportunity to probably hear questions that they would want to ask. And I think it's really great. So I'm excited to be here and with you and with Angel today. Yeah, it's been a lot of fun doing this as well. I mean, I learned something from every episode, and a lot of times, the aspiring investors will ask questions that make me think, and it's really, really fun, and it helps people. I think that's probably the coolest thing about it. But absolutely.
Before we get, this is kind of a background question, but I've heard it said that you are Mr. Kansas City. How did you get that nickname?
Well, it's a self-proclaimed and self-given title. So, we've been building, Brian, we've been building businesses, platforms for quite some time now. And LinkedIn being probably the largest for myself, I thought, how am I going to differentiate myself? Well, there's one guy in Kansas City that everybody knows, and that's Patrick Mahomes. I said, well, Patrick's not on LinkedIn. And so that just lets him, get off the playing field here. And so let me see if I can't title myself Mr. Kansas City. It was kind of as a joke at first, but then it just stuck. And I can't tell you how many times people have said, hey, I found you because of your title in your LinkedIn profile. And I said, fantastic. I'm going to keep it that way. And I love all the people that reach out to me because they see that part. So definitely self-proclaimed and self-given. That is making sure that everybody knows that.
And it worked. I mean, I heard, I don't know if I was introduced to you as Logan or Mr. Kansas City first, but for the longest time when people would talk to me and say, hey, I'm interested in investing in Kansas City, it's like, oh, do you know Logan? And that's kind of, so your marketing strategy, I think, worked perfectly. And, a lot of people do know you as Mr. Kansas City. So whether it's self-proclaimed or given by somebody else, I mean, it doesn't matter.
It kind of answers that question of what's the one thing you want to be known for and how are people going to remember you? And I think that's really important just to get the door open, right? Is being niched down. I mean, geographical location is really easy to do. Kansas City's not that big. There's not that many people doing what I'm doing in Kansas City. So that worked for me. And might not work for everybody in a large market or something like that, but it did. And I think that it's important for people to know, hey, what do you do? Where do you do it? And how do you do it? I think those are the three things that you have to be able to answer pretty quickly.
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, you're right. Kansas City is not a huge market, but it's
Right.
not small either. It's big enough that you're always going to have deal flow there. And I think some of the issues we run into in, like, we're in upstate South Carolina, there's not very many people there, not very many apartments. I'm in Idaho Falls right now. We pulled a CoStar report, and I think there are 16 apartment complexes greater than 40 units in the city, so there's not a lot of opportunity, but I think Kansas City is kind of that happy medium. It's small enough that you can make a name for yourself, and big enough that you've got a lot of opportunities. So
yeah, I would agree. And this is the other thing I'll say about that is, having smaller markets is good in some ways because you can quantify exactly what you're going after, but also you're going to get tapped out. But what I've seen be very successful, Kansas City is a pretty fragmented market. What I mean by that is there's the Missouri River that kind of just north of downtown that really, separates the North Kansas City from Kansas City. And then you have the Kansas side, which is a completely different ball game as well. Geographically speaking, Kansas City is pretty huge, from a square mile standpoint. And I have some buddies in the Northland that they absolutely know every single apartment owner and have been building relationships with them. I frankly can't do that in just Kansas City proper, but it does work if you have a certain location that's all you invest in, and that's what you're trying to do, is you can build those relationships with people. And so it worked in Kansas City. We're about 2.2 million people, I think, just kind of the MSA. So it's not small, but definitely I know that there's a certain amount of units and properties that I'm going after, and I know who holds those. And so instead of like building relationships necessarily with just property owners, for me specifically, it's looking at who owns the largest percentage of properties and who can I transact with multiple times throughout the next 5, 10, 15 years. And so I'm sure this is a trend that you've been seeing as well. Property owners are becoming older, and they have to be able to have some plan to let those properties go. And so my goal is to find those property owners that have multiple holdings. They might be a business like mine. It might be a private equity company. They might be a REIT. And how do I build relationships with them so we can transact multiple times? And that's kind of been my strategy. It's worked out a couple of times. It's actually how we found 2 or 3 of our last projects.
So which begs the question, how do you build relationships with them?
Yeah, well, this is a unique, strength of mine, is just being my top talent being individualization. So if you take Strength Finders, they're going to give you 5 top talents, which if cultivated, you can develop into your strengths. And mine has really been individualization, which I can understand where somebody else is coming from. I understand what they're looking for. And then I don't make really an ask, right? It's just, hey, I want to learn from you. I'm trying to build my business. How can I add value to you? And I know that's an overused term in the space, but it's truly that way. Like today, I'll give a prime example from a guy that we bought a property from, 6 months ago. He has another 3,000 units in and around the markets that I want to invest in. I just had lunch with him, and he noticed that I had some FTW swag. That's my company. And I said, you know what? I'm going to get you some socks, And so today, my assistant, we packed a box that is going to send a bunch of FTW golf balls and bags and all of these different things to that investor. So it's just, 1, getting the conversation started, but 2, coming with something that is of value to them, not just taking, but trying to give your own perspective and what you're currently seeing and doing as well. A lot of these older property owners are really interested in how people are using digital marketing, social media, doing what we're doing right here to grow their business. And so that's one thing that I've noticed being a really interesting trend is people will ask about, hey, how do you have 17,000 followers on LinkedIn? How are you finding deals, vendors, investors, all of that through digital marketing, social media? And then I come with a pretty concise plan and say, hey, this is exactly how we're doing it. And I'd be happy to talk with your marketing team, investor relations person, however, whoever I need to talk to try to add some value to that. And, we're hiring a lot of the same people that they're trying to hire. And so if we pass on somebody, I'm like, hey, what positions are you trying to fill right now? Let me see if I can go back into my database, reach out to some candidates that we didn't hire and make some introductions for you, right? Like, what's your pain point in your business right now? Seeing if maybe I have the same one and trying to add some value to that. That's been my approach. I play a lot of golf with these guys too. So if I can get out on the golf course and chase the little white ball around, that gives you a different opportunity to meet people outside of the office space. I think that's really important. That's been my strategy.
Different level. I mean, it's a different level of connection.
That's exactly right. Just trying to get people out of their current environment, their work mode, and say, hey, I got a charity event coming up. I got a gala coming up. I've got a speaker series coming up. I've got a CEO series. I've got something else that's not necessarily, hey, come to my office. Let's have a business meeting. Let's go play golf. Let's go have a drink somewhere, something like that. And that's been really beneficial too, is just to get people out of their kind of work environments and learn about their families and those types of things. And it does take a lot of time, but you know what? I mean, so does trying to build this type of business and try to compete with, all of the call for offers out there. I mean, I think that there's two strategies there. It's the long game, and it's just what everybody else is doing. And what everybody else is doing is not working for at least my business.
Yeah, and a lot to unpack there, and something that I keyed in on right now is the swag, the FTW swag.
Yep.
The reason I keyed in on that is because of the hat I'm wearing. Somebody who came on my podcast as a thank you, Ram Torres, sent me a bunch of hats with his logo on it,
Yep.
And so, what am I doing right now? I'm wearing his hat around, but that's one small thing that spreads the word. And I love a lot of things you said. There's a lot to unpack, but it's just building relations, getting people out in different environments, getting to know them on different environments. And I mean, you got a lot of different personality types out there, and you never know, you may connect a lot better with one type of person on the golf course, another person at a gala, another person, sitting across from a Zoom screen. So, since you're doing a little bit of all of that, you can really reach a whole bunch more people. So
one more pro tip, and I know we can move on to the next thing or two more pro tips. The first being, I recap almost every meeting that I have. So like if I'm meeting with a mentor or somebody that I want to do business with, and they imparted wisdom on me, I then send an email saying, hey, Jim, thank you so much for meeting with me. Here's what I learned. Here's specifically how I'm going to implement it, and make it very personalized. And then the second thing is, I'm a big reader. And so I gift a lot of books, but in the cover of the book, I will write down my key learnings from the book and the page numbers, and saying, hey, if you don't have time to read the whole thing, here are the highlights, boom, and hand that to somebody as well. I think those are a couple of good pro tips that have helped on that front.
Do you still do your weekly recap on LinkedIn?
I haven't done that in a while. I came to the conclusion, the time I was spending on that weekly recap was like an hour. And I was like, this is not, I'm not able to do this anymore. And so I haven't been doing that for some time, but those posts were very, very successful, just because you could tag other people, right? Like, hey, I met this person and that person. And I saw some other folks kind of take that same methodology and move it forward, which is great. So I think it's a pretty good, piece of content to post.
I thought it was brilliant. I mean, and there were a couple of weeks where like, how do I get on Logan's, weekly recap, and I think there was a lot of people who were thinking that, number one, but number two, you were introducing a lot of people in the LinkedIn space, so I talked to so-and-so about this. I talked to so-and-so about that. And that became a connection tool for a lot of people. I think you released it on Sundays, if I remember right, but
it was,
it was one of those, Monday mornings, I'd see the post on LinkedIn. I'd be like, oh, I need to connect with that person too. Or, hey, that person sounds interesting.
Man, Brian's challenging me to get it going again. So I might have to make it happen.
But I mean, if you don't, I will, and we'll just, no big deal, right? And it'll be, hey, I connected with Logan and Angel this week, and we had a great little session, but well, that's cool. So we talked, we didn't hit a lot of background, but we got a lot of really, really good meat and potatoes there. Let me ask you what your motivation is. What's your big burning why?
Yeah. And Brian, there's plenty of content out there around the background piece of this, but a part of that usually leads into this why, and that's why I'm going to mention this. But, about 8 years ago, I lost my father to his battle with drugs and alcohol. And I just had this huge kind of revelation decision point in my life to say, hey, the decisions that you do make have real ramifications. I had just been cut from the NFL. I was trying to figure out who I wanted to be, what I wanted to focus on. And then I lost my father. And so my why is, I steal this from Ed Milet now, but, he always says his greatest fear in life is dying and then meeting the person that he was meant to be in heaven, right? And so, that's the same for me. It's like I am frankly very scared of mediocrity and not living up to my my main potential in life. And I know Angel sends his kids to Catholic schools. I'm a big Catholic guy as well. And so that's really important for me, is to use those God-given talents and try to develop them into strengths and help as many people as I possibly can. And so when my dad passed away, I said, well, how am I going to do that at the best of my ability? I need to work on me. And that's when I started reading all the books, listening to all the podcasts, and saying, okay, I'm going to put a stake in the ground and say, I'm no longer an athlete. I'm no longer willing to just kind of do what I was doing previously. And my focus needs to completely change on becoming the guy that I want to be, that will attract the things into my life that I need to, that I'm trying to accomplish. Right. And that's from Darren Hardy, who I'm sure stole it from Jim Rohn and Zig Ziglar and all of those guys. Yeah. The first one that I did was, okay, well, I'm trying to find my wife right now. Right. I wasn't a big dater in college. I played football. I was an academic guy. And so I said, well, what type of man would my wife want? Would my ideal wife want? And then I started to kind of break down what I needed to accomplish as an individual. A lot of that was emotional intelligence. I think as men, we like to sweep our emotions under the rug quite a bit. And unfortunately, that causes a lot of angst and, And so, exactly. Right. And the book that really helped me with this was Lewis Howes' book, The Mask of Masculinity. Mm-hmm. And one of the identities or masks that he wore for a long time was being an athlete. So after I took that off, it was like, okay, who am I trying to be? What am I trying to accomplish? And, it was really around freedom for me. I wanted the freedom to be able to live a life that would allow me to live out those talents, those God-given talents that were given to me. And I just didn't think that maybe working for somebody else was going to allow me to do that. And so I started to research different avenues to get to that. And business owner, real estate kept popping up. And that's kind of how I got started in the space.
Nice. And something you said resonated with me. I think one of the biggest fears I have as well is, meeting my maker and realizing how much I left on the table,
That's right.
And, what I could have become in this life, and not reaching my potential, and
exactly.
I think we'll have opportunities in the next life to keep on progressing, but that's beside the point. But
sure,
the better you do in this life, the better things are going to be the next. But that said, let's talk a little bit about some of the projects you've worked on, some of the deals you've done. So if you want to give us a quick overview of one of the projects, I would very much appreciate that.
Yeah, absolutely. And I'm going to do most recent because it's on my mind and I'm excited about it. We started in Kansas City, so Kansas and Missouri. Then we moved to Nebraska, and now we're in Iowa. And this last project that we're completing next week is 120 units in Des Moines, Iowa. And one thing I learned early on in my career, not early on, but just as we progressed to about 1,400 units across those 4 states was, value add deals are hard. And I'm not sure anybody's really talking about this, and maybe they are, but they're difficult. They're difficult to manage. They're difficult to control. They're difficult to get the renovations done, all of those things, right? I mean, it's just hard stuff to do, especially if they are certain vintage. And so, as an aspiring investor, I got started with the older products. I got started with the 60s and the 70s types of product, and it was Class C, and nothing against that. We own a lot of that product, and I'm still open to doing those. But we've started to transition to newer and larger assets for a few reasons. One is the operational component of it. 2 is just getting higher rents is important as we think about our portfolio, and making sure that we still understand that attainable housing is a huge need out there. And anything that's constructed now really has to have really high rents to support those construction costs. I think everybody probably listening to this understands that. And so finding those projects between 2010 and 2020 that, were developer, still developer owned, and they had kind of the construction grade finishes in there, great product, but, not the countertops, not the
bells and
cabinets,
whistles. Yeah.
Not the flooring, just because that's not their MO. They get it leased up and then they move on to the next the next project. And so, this is a 120 unit Class B project built in 2014. We really had to unpack this deal because when it was developed alongside a LIHTC project, meaning it was a mixed kind of income project. So there was a LIHTC component to it, and we had to actually renegotiate cross-access easements with the Iowa Finance Authority, and getting that done, as well as trying to get that passed with the lender and all the organizational charts, has been a real learning experience for us. But what I love about this project is it gives us the opportunity to still be 40% below the 30% attainable metric and be 2014 build and be about $100,000 lower than new construction costs. That is a really compelling story for me, for our investors, moving forward, thinking about the exit strategy, who's going to purchase this property, and the ability for the residents to continue to pay those rental increases. Was just kind of a diamond in the rough that we were able to find, and I was really excited about that project. So that's the one that's most recent on my mind.
And there are some complexities. You mentioned the LIHTC, and for people who are not familiar with that term, low income housing tax credit. It's a property where if the owners do certain things, they get tax credits for providing low income housing. But a lot of people stray away from those just because dealing with housing authorities is difficult. And that's an added complexity onto it. It's the more complex certain deals are, the more people will just shy away from them. And going back further to something you said, I was smiling really, really big when you were talking about, the C-class value add being difficult. They are difficult. And if you're buying 60s and 70s vintage, you're with 60s and 70s vintage problems. I mean, 50-year-old properties. And then the other thing that I keep on saying, if you have C-class tenants, you have C-class problems, and there's a lot of things you'll get in C-class, maybe a much higher economic vacancy type stuff, or collections bad debt than you would in A-class or B-class. So, I mean, lots you can make money lots of different ways in real estate. Some ways are a lot more complicated than others.
Exactly.
So let's ask this: what's up on your plate next? What's next for you?
Well, what I mentioned before we started recording was, really becoming a vertically integrated company has been an idea that many folks talk about, and some have completed, but that is not easy, as everybody probably knows. Understanding how to manage properties, how to staff, how to recruit, how to retain, how to lead. And so really kind of going through this transition of kind of been an investor and kind of, an acquisitions investor type of person to more of a business owner and leader has been kind of a transition the last year for me. And so I spend a lot of my time now reading resources on how to lead effectively, and really focus on developing people and understanding how to delegate the right way. So all that to be said, starting property management this month, taking over about 500 units of our portfolio and then stair-stepping it from there is on the plate for us. Looking at different asset classes. We own office and retail as well. And so I think the time is right to start putting offers in on some different asset classes here in Kansas City that we feel really comfortable with managing, understanding the lease up strategy, the location. It's just very different than multifamily, but my business partners have been in that business for over 7 years now. And so, really just understanding where that cycle is for each property. I've been posting a lot about office and retail and different development opportunities, just because, I might have an anchoring bias, but I also think that my underwriting is pretty good. There are going to be some changes here coming down the pipeline, whether that be economy related, financial system related, whatever. I don't need to get into that. I could speak on that for an hour. Everybody could debate that for a long time. But at the end of the day, there is other opportunities in the commercial real estate space that we're evaluating, and then continuing to build out relationships in these other markets that we're interested in. So whether that be Oklahoma, Arkansas, Tennessee, Florida, Southeast Missouri, things like that, is just kind of expanding that footprint, continuing to spiderweb that out. Those are all things that are kind of on the plate for us and that we're focused on and growing as a company on right now.
Awesome. Yeah, a lot of good things to look forward to then. And vertical integration is it's a dream for a lot of people. It's a tough road to travel. A lot of things a lot of irons in the fire, sounds like. But I love what you said, where you're looking to basically become a business owner, and I'm one of those guys that read the Rich Dad Poor Dad Cash Flow Quadrant series, and I think a lot of people have. I feel like in Four Oaks Capital, we are all in the S quadrant. We're all self-employed. We're not business owners. If we walk away, that the business is going to die. And I appreciate you saying that, because you're essentially trying to move from that S quadrant to the B quadrant.
That's
where
exactly right.
You can walk away. You can build it up. You can train the people to run it, to do what you want them to do, and go on vacation for 3 weeks. Spend a month in Cancun if you want, or wherever your favorite place is to vacation. But anyway,
I think the big piece of that is understanding the different segments of your business, right? I mean, we have 3 principals, but now we have 18 employees, right? And so now it's like, who's managing who, right? And a great book that I just recently read is Who, Not How. Forget the author of that book, but it really says, hey, who can solve your problems? Not how are you going to solve them? And then it becomes, how are you going to become a leader of these people? And what you can do is you can implement leverage through people, technology, and capital. A lot of people understand capital and maybe a little bit of the technology side, but we're in the people business, guys. I mean, this is real estate. I know a lot of firms who have tried to remove people out of this business has not been very successful for them. And so understanding those 3 points of leverage, putting them together and figuring out how to move forward will allow you to really kind of hit that rocket ship. And I think that's really important as the next iteration of people's businesses. And not very many people get there. I was just in a speaking engagement with somebody that was CEO kind of coach, and he said some crazy numbers to me that really said that, out of the 20 million small businesses that there are in the United States, or, self-employed people, a fraction of those actually get to $1 million in revenue, even smaller to 100 million, and so that's what we're trying to get to, is build a business that can actually sustain for the long haul. And the only way to do that and avoid burnout and do it the right way is to actually build these teams that we're talking about.
I love that book. Great recommendation there. So that's it. We're going to shift gears a little bit and bring Angel on. So Angel, welcome to the show today.
Thank you for having me. I appreciate it very much.
Yeah, absolutely. Pleasure to have you on the show, and very much appreciate your time today. So Angel, do us a favor. Tell us about yourself.
Well, I'm currently a fireman in Chicago. So I've been doing that for just over 2.5 years with the city. I worked in the suburbs of Chicago since 2008. So I've been doing fire service for some time now. It goes by really quick. I said married. We've been married 10 years, got 3 kids. Like Logan said, we sent them to Catholic school, so they love it. We love it. We're just working, really. My wife works a lot, and when I'm at work, I'm gone. So she's by herself, working from home, and then taking care of the kids, picking them up, dropping them off. So it's a busy schedule.
Now, what does your shift look like as a firefighter?
For us in the city here, it's 24 hours on, and then 48 hours off is the normal schedule for us.
Okay. All right. Yeah. So, I mean, when you're gone, you're gone. And that's something that, is an adjustment for the family. I mean, I was active duty military, and there's a lot of times where, it's very similar. When I'm gone, I'm gone. It's just like, but you have 48 hours. I mean, 24 hours on, 48 hours off.
Yes.
I can imagine that, a creative mind can do a lot with that 48 hours, every couple of days. So, Yep. And income's real estate, right?
That's the goal, and that's why I made the transition to take the job in the city, because I wanted more free time. Even though I was in the suburbs, the schedule wasn't the same. It was a part-time department, and I worked full-time as a public works employee. So I was gone 6-7 days a week because it was such a small town and we were so busy. I didn't have any time to really focus on real estate. And when the opportunity came for Chicago, I jumped on it to have more flexibility with my time so I can focus on the real estate.
Yeah. Yeah. Nice. Now, I think you've alluded to it a little bit already, but you want to explore that why a little bit more. What's your big burning why?
It's my wife and kids. I want to have more flexibility again, even more than I have now, because although I love my job and it's been great, to me, I'm still at the mercy of, if I want to make more money, I have to wait for overtime. I have to wait for a raise, things like that. And it's not bad because the job pays well, but in order to do other things on top of what we're doing now, I have to wait. Or get another job and then work again 7 days a week. And that's not fun. So I wanted real estate because I wanted to kind of control, my destiny, our future, and just have more flexibility.
And if you do it right, you can detach the time from the money. Like, we were talking about the cash flow quadrant, the E quadrant, your time equals money. And, a lot of things you said, I had very similar feelings, just in the military, there's one way to make more money, and that's wait. You wait more time, you get to that next year interval, and all of a sudden you're making more money. It's not performance based. It's just wait, and get promoted. That's how you make more money in the military. But you're very, very much inside a box when it comes to the pay scale, and you're never going to make more money than that pay chart tells you you're going to make. So well, that said, Angel, we got Logan on the line. What do you want to ask him?
Well, thanks for jumping on or allowing me to be on with you guys. I'm a newbie, and just trying to be a sponge and soak everything up. So it's interesting, Logan. I know you played football. My son just started youth football, and I noticed a difference in him playing football because, man, they even to being a kid, they had some rough practices. It was hot in August. We had a couple of days here. It was 108 with the heat index, and they're still practicing. So I'm jealous of him because I never did that, or of you because I never played football. I just wonder, what do you take from that, all your years of football, and apply that to business, because you had to learn a lot of life through that,
Great question. A couple things that come to mind. One is working as a team, understanding that there's different roles and responsibilities, and based on in football, height, athletic ability, weight, you are kind of put into a certain role, right? And so for me, that was really eye-opening to say, just because I'm 6'3" and 280 pounds doesn't mean there's not a spot for me, and so understanding that there's a spot for every single person on a team has been able to help me translate that now, more intangibles, right, when we think about the business, but understanding that each person is unique in their own right ability, and it's your job as a leader to find out how they mesh and work together well. The second is repetition is key. In my early career, I was just a sales guy, pounding the phones, making it happen, doing everything that I could. But I remember back to college and high school, and we just did the same things over and over again, because they were the foundational elements that if you worked on and you were able to be perfect at, you would be better. And that was important to me, was trying to understand that. And so in business, breaking down what are the KPIs that are going to lead to our success, how are we measuring them, how are we tracking them, who's doing them, and how can we get better at them, is really important. And just like this podcast, repetition is key. I'm sure Brian, when he first got started, this podcast probably looked a lot different than it does now, right? I mean, just the fluidity of it, all of it, right? And so that's another part of it. And the last thing was, I first learned how to set and achieve goals in football. It was like, hey, we got to do off-season training. I'm like, what? What are we doing here? Off-season training. What are you talking about?
It's off season. I mean,
it's off season, man. I'm supposed to be enjoying my time. No,
Yeah.
off season training was conditioning. It was weightlifting. It was in the film room. It was doing walkthroughs, all of the stuff that led up to this game, which really was a fraction of all the time that you spent, right? It's like 3 hours on a Friday or Saturday, whenever you were playing. And, for me now it's like, okay, what is the off season training that we're doing? So it's like, a lot of people will say in this business, I can't find deals. I can't find deals. And my number one feedback to them is that's okay. Put the reps in, because this is your off season. If you're getting started right now, it's probably going to be very difficult, but use it as your off season to get ready for when the opportunity comes. Because if that opportunity then lands in your lap, just like the Cincinnati Bengals did in Kansas City here recently, and that opportunity was not seized, then you're not going to be able, then you have to wait another year until the opportunity is there. And so I try to think about business in seasons and how to achieve those goals, and making sure that when your off season is, when it's time to cultivate, when it's time to actually, enjoy the fruits of your labor too. Because early on in my career too, man, I was not somebody that celebrated successes. And it's very important when you start to have a team to be able to celebrate those successes, acknowledge people that are doing things correctly, and get better and debrief to win. And that's a military phrase. I listened to a guy at a different speaker series. His name is Robert Cujo. He was an Air Force pilot. And, his book is Debrief to Win, and you have to be able to debrief these things that happen. So every time we have a project that closes, we get the whole team in and we debrief what went well, what didn't go well, what do we need to change for the next time, and how are we going to be better, right? And so I think all of those things, setting those goals, working on repetition, knowing when my off season was, all of that I learned from football and different athletic endeavors that I've been able to translate now over into business.
Yeah. And I'll say something that you reminded me of. I coach a 10 and under basketball team and a 6 and under basketball team, so I got 2 kids on basketball teams. And one of the kids on the team last week going into practice said, "Coach, we worked on dribbling last week. Why do we have to do it again?" It's kind of funny, knowing what you have to put those reps and sets in, and a lot of people in the investing world have that same mentality. It sounds stupid, coming from like a 9-year-old boy, but we worked on dribbling last week. Why do we got to do it again? It's the same thing in business and multifamily investing. Is get brilliant at the basics, and you'll do well.
Exactly right. Yep.
Yeah. All right, Angel, what else you got?
Well, how about for you, Brian? I mean, you were in the Marines.
Yep.
That's awesome. Thank you for your service.
Mm-hmm.
I noticed that being in the fire service, some of the best guys were Marines. And I always was like, man, I should have went into the Marines, like when I was younger. And but they always talk about their training. They always talk about boot camp and how tough it was, because when we went through our training in our academy, it seemed like it didn't really affect a lot of the Marines the same way it might, regular person like us. And I just wonder how you use that,
something I've been thinking about a lot lately is, the Marine Corps is one of the largest organizations in the world. Army, Navy, and Air Force are all larger than the Marine Corps, but when you rack and stack, world-size organizations, you got 250,000 people in the Marine Corps, and so to succeed with something that big, to make something that big successful, you have to rely on some well-defined systems, and boot camp is part of that. It doesn't matter if you go to boot camp in Paris Island or San Diego, though a lot of people from Paris Island would say so. But you're going to get roughly the same experience. You're going to have the same training on both coasts. It doesn't matter who you learn it for. Everybody's going to pick up a rifle the same way. Everybody's going to do immediate and remedial actions on a rifle the exact same way every time. And it's the same if you want an organization to get big, like Logan's talking about doing. You've got to nail the systems. You got to make sure everybody knows the processes and they know how to do it, and that there's something in place to make sure that they're doing it right. And I think that's really what the Marine Corps does well when it comes. I mean, there's a lot of things you can learn from it, but that's just what's been on my mind most recently is, you've got to nail the systems. If you want to be a 250,000 person organization, you have to have very robust systems that are fairly easy to use, fairly easy to operate within. And, that's my biggest takeaway right now anyway.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
I love it.
Yeah.
I wish I would have did it.
It's kind of funny because I made fun of one of my friends for joining the Navy out of high school. I thought, I was nowhere in the mindset to join the military until, September 11th. That was kind of the turning point, but didn't know I'd like it. Yeah.
Oh, that's awesome.
So cool. We got time for more questions. One more question if you got one.
I got one. I'm kind of stuck in the mud here myself personally because I want to jump into investing.
Mhm.
And, at the same time, we want to purchase a home. And I know just from talking to people and research, it's better to buy, say a multifamily first and then buy the home. But, when we moved to the city, we had to sell our home and we loved it. It was perfect, but it was part of the sacrifice. And now I feel like we need another home, and I don't want to keep putting that off because I'm chasing what I want to do, and have my family keep waiting and waiting and waiting. So I kind of wanted to do both at one time or fairly close, but I really don't know how to get started, as far as buying a multifamily for an investment and a home for us to live in. I don't know which way is the right
some
way.
Feedback on that.
Yeah.
There's some folks in the industry that will tell you never to buy a home. I am not of that strategy. I look at the home as our domestic church, and so it's very different for me. That is an absolute investment in my livelihood, in my business. I have an office there. My wife works from there. My kids need a safe, comfortable place to live. All of those things, right? So that's one component of it. The other component is how to get started in investing, right? Is there's not that much translation when you think about doing large scale multifamily properties to owning a duplex. And what I mean by that, let me clarify, is the skills that you're going to learn necessarily doing kind of a duplex or a fourplex, living in one unit and renting out the others. There are some that will help. But when you go to speak to investors or a banker or a vendor or a broker and say, hey, I own a duplex or a fourplex that I bought and I rented out, they're not really going to care. And so there's not that much translation into doing a 120 unit multifamily property. And so my feedback always is, get your home right, because if I think one of my favorite quotes, I think Oprah maybe said it, is you can't give what you don't have. And making sure that is correct and top of the line is really important for me personally. That's my own thought process and thesis around that. But what you can do is, and I tell a lot of people this, is, use this as an off season, right? Like, so take an assessment of yourself, right? So you got knowledge, you got experience, you got capital, you got relationships, right? And so everybody has those four things, wherever you're at on the spectrum of those varies, right? But you have those four things that are needed to do any new endeavor. And so understanding what your skill set is really important to me. I focused when I got started doing two things: a skills assessment. So Strength Finders, Colby, now Ray Dalio has Principles U, which is free. I highly recommend. And then I overlaid that with kind of the commercial real estate space. And so I took those strengths and said, okay, what is the commercial real estate process like? There's finding the deal, there's managing the deal, there's financing the deal, there's operating the deal. There's all of these different pieces of the puzzle. I figured out where my skill set would be the top, the top place to spend my time. And I focused on trying to fill the other pieces with either other people or services or vendors that I could find. And that's how I got kind of started, right? Is I got to be able to jump in the business as a vendor to a $50 million fund, which gave me invaluable experience and knowledge and relationships, which was really important. But I had never done a multifamily property until I did my first multifamily property. I did 200 plus single family homes for a fund, and then took that structure that they had, understood that, and said, I want to overlay that in the commercial real estate space, move my license to be a commercial and multifamily broker, did another 50 transactions, close to 300 million in transactions, learned doing that, and then said, okay, now it's my time to go start to purchase my first piece of real estate. And so at that point, now I had capital, relationships, experience, and I had, knowledge that I could take to a broker, property owner, and say, hey, I transact these things all the time. I'm actually looking to purchase myself. And so that was an easier segue into that. And so I think for me, just understanding my skill set first, overlaying that in the space, what I was trying to accomplish, and then solving for the rest was kind of my process. I'm sure Brian has some thoughts on that too.
Being a 20-year military guy, we moved 10 times in 20 years, so we've gone through the let's find a place to live process a lot. And I'll tell you, there's a big difference in how happy your family is based on where you live, so that's something that you have to get right, so whatever the right answer is for you. And for me, we ended up renting more than we owned in the last 20 years. We've probably lived in homes that we've owned for, maybe a sum total of 3.5 years out of the 20, right? Maybe 4.5, but whether you're renting or buying, you have to live somewhere, make sure it's right, and then, I don't see it as a one or the other scenario. Right size your house, your living situation, and at the same time, be looking to get into multifamily. And there are a lot of people that'll house hack, and there's a lot of benefits that come from that. When I say house hack, you buy a fourplex, you live in one of the units.
Right.
But like Logan says, that doesn't translate directly into multifamily, but it could start building your wealth. The project's going to appreciate, you can get some passive income. It can help you along the journey, and it can be a small first step towards that 120 unit. But there's still going to be many steps in between. But anyway, we are out of time. So one last question for each of you. Logan, you get to go first. How can listeners learn more about you?
Well, jump on LinkedIn, search Logan Freeman, Mr. Kansas City. My big mug will pop up there. Yep. But we also have our website, ftwinvestmentsllc.com. Those are the two ways.
Perfect. And we'll have a link to the profile and link to the web address in the show notes. So if anybody wants to see those, just check it out. Angel, same question for you.
Well, same thing. I'm not Mr. Kansas City, but you can find me on LinkedIn. Mm-hmm. And I got my first book coming out, so I got all that information on there.
Awesome.
And that's it. I'm on LinkedIn, just trying to network and meet as many people as I can.
Is there a Mr. Chicago yet?
I'm sure there is. It's still not as catchy.
All right, yeah, but
it's catchy.
You can make it catchy. You can make it catchy. So anyway, hey, thanks so much, guys, for spending some time with me today, and I very much appreciate it.
Thank you.
Yeah,
I appreciate
thanks for having us on.
Hey, if you like that episode, make sure you hit that subscribe button. But more importantly, if you haven't joined our multifamily educational community, the Tribe of Titans, yet, you are missing out. So get yourself 30 days free by clicking the link below in the description, or go to thetribeoftitans.info, and we'll see you there.